Next from Springfield, we talked to Senator Michael Frerichs and then Representative Tom Cross, the Democrat and Republican candidates for state treasurer. The two offer their thoughts on the fiscal year 2015 budget coming out of the legislature and what they're hearing from constituents on the campaign trail. This runs about 10 minutes.
Senator Mike Frerichs, thanks for joining us again on the Illinois Channel. We are here at the end of the legislative session. We've had a number of the budgetary bills go through, and we wanted to get your input relative to being the Democratic nominee for state treasurer. Give us, if you would, your overall assessment of the fiscal year budget that's coming out of the legislature this year for fiscal 15.
Well, I think we're never completely happy with any budget that passes. But this is a budget that's going to allow the tax increase to expire and maintain our investment in our young people in the state. We hold education funding level here, and I think if we're going to continue to grow this state and to attract quality employers by having quality employees, that's an investment we need to make.
If you were the state treasurer, is there anything that you would have advised the legislative leaders to something? How would you have changed the process, not the process, but the outcome, if in any way?
Yeah. Well, we're not allowed to have, we don't get to make the budget completely ourselves. This is a product of negotiation with people from diverse corners of this state. But I think some of the biggest priorities we have for the state is making investments in education. I think it's important that we did that with living within our means.
Yeah, I was talking to some of the people in higher education, and you have represented the University of Illinois over in the Champaign-Urbana area. I think they said they're getting flat funding, but they're happy with that. They almost, in this kind of a fiscal environment, count that as a win. As we go forward, what is your position relative to the tax rate that we have? I mean, it's not going to be extended apparently unless something is done in November. Do you think the state can move forward relative to the current revenue growth? And where do you come down on either the tax rate, or what do we do to spur growth, as some of the other people are suggesting we need to do?
Yeah. The tax rate is going to expire at the end of this year. There was no extension here. But this is something we're going to need to monitor. We need to make sure that we have the revenues to make investments in our schools, in our universities, in our young people, and also at the same time make sure that we are maintaining adequate bond ratings so the state can have favorable rates when they go out for bonds.
And on the state treasurers, we talked about this before in an interview, but just what role should the state treasurer have throughout the year as far as advising the governor, the legislative leaders, if any, would you say?
Well, I think the state treasurer is a fiscal watchdog for the state, but the main responsibility of the treasurer is to oversee the state's investments. As a certified public finance officer, former county auditor, that's going to be my main priority.
And anything how would you assess as we close out here, how has it been for you as far as this legislative session? It seems when we look back last year, and we had medical marijuana, we had gay marriage, so some of the big issues, it seems to have been a little quieter, I think, just from a legislative standpoint. What's your overall assessment?
Typically, election years are quieter years, but in my experience, no year in Springfield is quiet.
All right, well, Mike Frerichs, thanks for joining us.
All right, Terry, thank you.
Representative Tom Cross, thanks for joining us again on the Illinois Channel, and appreciate it. Here you are, being a former head of the Republicans in the House, and as we are standing here, we're wrapping up the legislative session. What are your thoughts as you will officially still be a member of the House through the end of January, but from a practical standpoint, most of your House career is now past you. Are you reflected on that?
No, I'm kind of caught up in what's going on here, and it's unfortunately, from a policy standpoint, it's more of the same. It appears that we're going to leave Springfield with an unbalanced budget, increased debt and bills, maybe as high as $2 billion, and it's been that way for the last few years, which is a little frustrating. But now I haven't had time to really reflect on things because of one, the campaign, and two, it's just a busy time of year.
And of course, you're running for state treasurer. Let's talk about, with all the legislative actions on spending right now, and we had this proposal about whether we should have a progressive tax or whether we should extend the 5% tax, which isn't apparently going to happen. What do you see as the role of the state treasurer, if any, in impacting economic decisions on these kind of debates?
Yeah, I think the treasurer's office can be used in a greater way to engage in some of the problems we have. For instance, we haven't had a balanced budget here in a number of years. We have over $5 billion in unpaid bills. That cost this state $300 million last year in late fees and penalties. Imagine what we could do with $300 million. The Constitution of our state mandates that we have a balanced budget. We've done the research on it. The Treasurer's Office has the ability, and I think should be the one to enforce that part of the Constitution. And if that means saying to the General Assembly, if you don't balance the budget, we want to help you get there, but if you don't, then we're going to take it upon ourselves to enforce that. And if it means going to court to take either the Speaker or the President or the Governor, we're going to do that, because we have got to start balancing the budget and living within our means in this state, or we'll never get out of the hole we have.
And overall, knowing what you know at this point relative to the budget that's being put together, what's your overall assessment of it?
It's more of the same. And you hear the terms kicking the can down the road. We are going to see some borrowing. We're going to see some fund sweeps. We're going to see putting off some bills to the tune of almost $2 billion of giving us additional debt. It's wrong. We're going to have over $35 billion. It's more than we've ever had as a state. We have simply got to learn, and it's not easy. We've got to learn to say, this is the pot of money. Let's prioritize where we're going to be, and make a determined effort not to spend more than we have. And we haven't seen that.
Bruce Rauner, the Republican candidate for governor, is talking about growing the economy, getting new revenues that way. At what point, how much money does it take to run the state, I guess, is the classic question. And the Republicans say we've got something, I think, $27 billion came in over the years since the tax increase, and yet $27 billion didn't go to just the pensions. As a caucus, were you able to say, where did the money go?
Well, look, because there's a mentality from a lot of folks here that there's never enough. And, look, there's some things we need to be very focused on. We need to provide good education for elementary and high school, and for higher ed, and for early childhood, and making sure we take care of human services and social services. But this is a General Assembly run by the Democrats the last few years who, because they've had so much money, they have neglected the idea of reform. They've neglected the idea of encouraging economic growth, as you mentioned with Bruce Rauner. Imagine, for instance, if we were able to lower our unemployment by 2 to 3 points. We would realize about $500 million in economic growth and revenue just by more people working, more people buying, the buying power. And we haven't seen any emphasis on that. And it seems to be, let's do the taxes, and let's neglect the reform, the holding back the spending, and improving the economy.
Do you worry with the tax increase not going up, of what economic impact there's going to be in the state? That's, from the Democratic side of the aisle, we hear calls as if there's going to be draconian cuts in the state services. Are you concerned about that?
I think the Democrats lost their credibility 3 years ago. They told us we're going to have dramatic cuts in education. You got to raise the taxes. We'll pay down our bills. Our bills have gone up. Education funding has gone down. So I think it's really difficult to take into account anything they say. I think, again, we go back to kind of this basic premise that the people that watch your show do at home. They have a certain amount of money they can spend every paycheck or every year. They're fortunate enough to save a little bit. Good for them. And many people live, kind of paycheck to paycheck. This state has lived beyond paycheck to paycheck and spent more than they've taken in, and we have simply got to stop that, among doing other things. Reforming Medicaid continues to be a priority, improving the business climate, but we've got to quit spending money we don't have.
And last question, as you go around the state and you're campaigning, you probably haven't been able to do maybe as much as you'd like with the legislature in. But what do you hear from the constituents? You kind of get your ear to the ground going around the state now as a statewide candidate.
I talk to Republicans, I talk to Democrats, I talk to independents. Ranges from frustration to embarrassment to downright anger. And people are seriously talking about leaving. I hope they don't. I'm running because I think we can turn this state around. I think it's a great state, best agricultural land in the world. Great hospitals, great universities. We can fix it, but we've got to do some tough things that aren't easy, and we have to be willing to make those tough decisions and talk straight to the voters.
All right, Representative Tom Cross, thanks again.
Thanks for having me.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.